1969, the world stopped. NASA sent the first humans to the moon. You might think that the hardest part was the rocket science, the physics, or the engineering. But there was another challenge that almost no one talks about, using the lunar module's control panel. Imagine this. You traveled 384,000 kilometers through space, and now, as you prepare to land, you are faced with a control panel covered in hundreds of switches, buttons, and readouts. There is no room for trial and error. Every astronaut had to master the interface before even stepping inside the module, because in space, pressing the wrong button could mean disaster. Now, while Unreal won't send you to the moon and you are not at risk of dying, opening it for the first time can feel just as overwhelming. But just like the astronauts, once you understand the interface, you unlock the power to create something incredible. So today, I'll walk you through Unreal Engine 5's user interface step by step so you can start building your own worlds without feeling lost in space. No pun intended. But first, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified every time I post a new video about Unreal and how to build a career in video games. I've worked since 2013 in game development and design, from independent to AAA projects. But for the last few years, I've been teaching my knowledge to new talents. Now my focus is in helping you break into the gaming industry with the Game Creator Accelerator, a lifetime mentorship to guide your first steps. Want to connect and learn more about how to start building your career in video games besides your job, studies, or current responsibilities? Do you want to work in your dream? Email me at tony@woolon.com or check the description. Now, let's dive in. The first thing we do in this video is to understanding the main layout of Unreal. What we have here is a video game of something that I did in a previous video about how to install Unreal and start with 3 different games. If you want to see that video, you have it in the description with corresponding link. As you work with Unreal, you will discover this main layout is one that it will always be with you. The first section is important to mention in the main layout. First, the viewport, which is all this section here marked by this tab that says viewport. And in the viewport, you can see all the actors that are part of the scene. The second element is the content browser, usually located here on the bottom. And this is where you are going to order the folders, subfolders, and any other thing that will be part of this project. For example, even music, sounds effects, special effects, coding, everything that is part of this project will be in some folder inside the content browser. The other element is the outliner. And every time you click over an object inside the viewport, you can see that the outliner selected. Then we have the details. For every object that you can click here in the viewport and at the same time is selected in the outliner, or that you can click in the outliner and you can see in the viewport, you have details associated with it, with this item. These details are a group of properties that you will discover how to work with them as you progress, depending on the type of item that is part of the scene. Talking about the main layout, we have the toolbar, this section on the top. As we progress, you will discover that you have the option of selection, that you can pick one object here, but you also have options to create landscape, foliage, painting, mesh painting, modeling, fracture, brush editing, and animation. Then we can immediately start playing with the game. I can move with my character. If I click escape, I get out of the game. But imagine that you are playing the game and as you can see the mouse disappear, but you want to have control of the mouse and see other elements around. In that case, you just click Shift F1 and then you have control. You can go away and see what is happening in the game. Don't worry, I'm going to explain you in a second how to navigate through the viewport. The second step of this video is navigating the viewport. To start working with the viewport, you need to understand how to navigate. Well, in this case, you are going to use a combination of keys on your keyboard and your mouse. If you use the right click and keep it down or drag it, then you can move the camera in different directions. It's like if you were viewing from the perspective of a player in first person and looking in every direction. If you want to move at the same time that you are looking in some direction, then you can use the keys W to move forward, S to move backwards, A to the left, and D to the right. Keep in mind that I'm pressing the right button of the mouse. You can also use the Q and the E to move up and down. The first thing you should do with Unreal is to get used to use all these tools, because believe me, you are going to be exploring all around your environment or the places that you are creating, and you need to be very comfortable using this tool. I recommend you to play a little bit with it. Because we're in the viewport, let's cover some of the buttons that you are going to interact with a lot. The first one is the hamburger here, which allows you to present several elements in this viewport that you might need in certain points. For example, one that is very useful is the show the FPS. So depending on the amount of graphics that you have to render, then you should have the information to the right saying what is the generation of FPS that this rendering is taking from your computer. Now, other things that are very important for us is the perspective. Here you have a perspective which is like it's a designer. It's like a first-person perspective, but you can also have a top perspective. But you can also move to the left. Let me move back. Here it is. And this is a trick very important. Let's go back to the perspective. And if I get to this object, you can see this object in the beginning of the game that has the gamepad, which is called player start. This is where the player is going to spawn as soon as the game starts. If you are in the viewport, and let's say I move away from here and I'm in this position, and I click the play start, but I don't know where it is on the scene, I just have to select it on the outliner and click F. And then I will be centered around this object. If you want to rotate, you can use the Alt key and the left click of the mouse to rotate around this object. Now, let's say that I select the player start and I go to one of these perspectives, let's say left, and I'm not sure where this object is. Again, I can use the click F and I will be centered based on that object. You can move from different perspectives depending on what you need: top, bottom, left, right, front, back, and also cinematic viewport. The next button is delete, and this will, in cases that you have too many components on your game, depending on your requirements, you can, for example, remove the light, and this reduces the time of processing, of rendering elements around, and it's easier for you to work. You can also use wireframe, and so on. There are other options that you can add. In my case, I'm going to go back to delete. You can also use this show button in case that you want to remove certain elements from the analysis or the development that you are doing for the level. Let's say, for example, here you have the clouds, and if I want to remove the clouds, I can click here and the clouds are removed. The same thing happens to any other components that you might not need in some moment. To the right, we have more options for the viewport. Let's start with this one, which is the select object. As you can see, you can use the key Q to access immediately. And this is just for picking objects in the scene. In the moment that you click it, you will see an outline for that object indicating that it was selected. As just mentioned a moment ago, when you select an object here, you will see it as well in the outliner. You can pick the outliner as well, and then click F, and you will be moved to the position where that object is located. Then we have the option of translating objects. Let's say I select this object here, and I am selecting the option of translating. You will see these arrows all around the object that will give you the option of moving this object. So I can click and drag, and the object will be moved. And it can be moved in different directions depending on the arrows. On the left of your viewport, you have the corresponding X, Y, and Z, and they have different colors. I can also move the object up, and if I start playing the game, you'll see that everything falls down. Other option is that you can move the object in a plane. So let's say that I want to move this object on the plane of Z and X. I can put the mouse over the plane, and you will see that both arrows for Z and X are selected, and now I can move the object in this entire plane. Other thing is that let's say that you have the object in the air and you want to place it exactly over the surface it has under it. Then you select the object and click the button End. As you have a button for translate, you also have a button for rotation. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing related to the translation. You will see that to the right, you have a snapping option for the translation of this object. In that moment, the snapping is available because it is blue, and it is a snap to 10. 10 represents 10 centimeters. I usually move it to 50, which is half a meter, or 100, which is a meter. And every time I move the object in any direction, then I have this control. This is for being very precise, and believe me, it helps a lot. But also, if you want to remove that option, you just click here, and now you can place the object exactly where you want it to be. And now I can rotate my object. What is interesting about the rotation, similar to the snapping for the translation, is that you can also have a snapping for rotation. So if you want to rotate your object specifically 30 degrees, then you can set the snapping to 10 degrees and move it 3 times, or rotate it 3 times. But you can also set the snapping to 90 degrees, and every time you rotate, you're going to rotate 90 degrees. This you can perceive that. Let's say something like 45. So 45, we're moving object 45 degrees. The last button of these groups is the scale, the select and scale. You will find different coordinates similar to when you translate the object, but in this case, every time you click and drag one of the coordinates, then you are going to scale this object in the direction of that coordinate. But also, if you select one side, like we did for the translation, you can pick 2 sides, and then you are dragging and expanding or scaling this object in that plane. Let me select now this one for translation, moving up, and then the end to put it over the surface. The next button is to define the coordinates based on the object or the reference world for your scene. So let's say, let me move this. In fact, let me Control Z some changes I did. And let's say I want to rotate this object. And you can see the coordinates. It is like in the middle of the object. But if I click here, then the coordinates are based on the object, of the coordinates as they were defined for this object. This is not the world. These are the coordinates of the object. If I click back here, then these are the coordinates of the world. In a similar way of the snapping for the translation or the rotation, you have one that is for the scaling. So by default, I think you have the 0.1. But you can also set to one particular value. Let's say 1. So this scale this to the double. It's just like 100%. And if you remove it or if you disable it, then you can scale this freely, whatever you want. The next two important tools of the viewport are first the camera. This one defines the speed of how you're going to move this camera. Let's say that in some moment you need to be very precise and the camera is moving too fast. Then you can click here and reduce the speed of the camera, and now you have more control. The same thing can happen if imagine that your map is really huge. Then you can define a movement of the camera that will be so fast, so that it will permit you to go to any place really fast. And the last one, important, that I use a lot is this one, because this provides you different perspectives of the same map all at the same time. As you move in one of them, you can move in the rest. Let's say that you don't want this to be the top. You can also select, let's say, I don't know, bottom. And here you have the bottom. By default, I love this setting as it is. And I can also, once I click on that button, I can click any of this square, and that will be the perspective that will to be presented. Also, I can click here and select this one. And as you can see, it's pretty cool. This is one of the most useful tools when you are overall prototyping levels. One last thing I want to cover about the viewport, in fact, is viewport in combination with the outliner, is the duplication of objects. You have two options to duplicate an object. One option is to select the object here or select the object here and just click the combination of Ctrl D and it creates an object besides it. I'm going to remove it. Or you can also select the object, keep the Alt key down and drag with the mouse to one side, and it creates a replica as the one that you picked before. So here we have two objects, and you can see in here, this is in the outliner, is the cube 19, and this is the cube 9. The third point we're going to cover is managing assets in the content browser. The content browser is the section on the bottom, as we mentioned a moment ago. This is where you are going to keep all the order of folders, subfolders, and any content associated with your video game. Now, one thing I like to mention about the content browser is first that every folder or file that you're going to add to your project has to be a child or a subfolder of the folder called content. In my case, I usually create a folder like this one, the underscore game, that allows me to classify the content that I am creating, not the content that I import to the project, but the content that I am creating from zero. To create a folder, you just have to, let's say that I'm going to remove this one, delete, yes. And to create the folder, right click, new folder, and write the name of it. One important tool to find files inside this group of folders is the filters. Let's say that from the content folder to all the subfolders, I want to look for the static meshes. If I click here, the filters where it says static mesh, it will only present the information of static meshes. But it will present the information of the subfolders from this one. If I select now the first person, as you can see, we don't have static meshes from folders on first person of subfolders of this one. Now if I get started content, then here are the static meshes. The same thing applies if you want to add all the things that you want to inspect inside the subfolders. It could be levels, it could be skeletal mesh. But also, it is possible for you to define different criteria. If you click here, you can add other types of files that you want to inspect. Let's say, for example, that you want to check the blueprints. So you can click here, the blueprints, and you have another classification to filter the blueprints. On the right and the setting buttons, you can also define how you want this to be presented. For example, you have the options of list, columns. I usually go for the tiles. You can also present it vertical, horizontally, and more options to present other contents from these folders and subfolders. Finally, you have a button which is called the fab. In case you don't have this Fab button installed, you can find a tutorial that I will present as well in the description about how to install this plugin for the version of Unreal that you're working on. By clicking on Fab, you can inspect a huge library of different types of assets that sometimes are free, sometimes are not. But if you're working in the gaming industry, you realize that in many occasions you can support with the work that others has been doing to create your own things. Overall, when you are prototyping and you are an independent developer, I will open the game folder. The add is a button that you can click to add different types of assets or objects to your folders. But you can also right click here and you will have the same option. Import allows you to import content to your project and save all the changes that you've been doing to the different assets, objects inside these subfolders. The last important element I wish to cover is the customization of the user interface. I mentioned that you have multiple windows that you can play with depending on the requirements of your project. But you can also take those windows and move it all around to the positions where you want. Every time that you try to move a window, let's say for example this outliner, you can place it beside the, let's say, the level, and you just moving the mouse, you will see that depending on the position here, for example, if I go to this left side, I'm going to be literally at the side of this level. If I move it to this section with the viewport and I decided to move it to this right side of the level viewport, then it's going to be placed there. This is very interesting because everyone has their particular taste in terms of how to place elements for the user interface. And my recommendation is that you start exploring, start testing until you find some setting that works for you. So tell me, what kind of game do you want to make? Drop it in the comments. I want to know how I can help you. If you are having trouble finding job opportunities in the gaming industry or want to transition to a career in video game without quitting your current job, I'm here to help. It is possible. Reach out to me at tony@woolun.com or check the description for more info and options. If this video added value to you, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss tips and tutorials on Unreal Engine and how to build your successful career in video games. And be sure to check out this video next on how to make video games without coding in Unreal. Until next time, keep creating, keep sharing, and most importantly, keep dreaming big. I'll see you soon, my fellow creators.